May 1943, Tunisia, North Africa. The Afrique Corps was dying under the merciless sun. General Rommel had already fled back to Germany. What remained of his once legendary desert army, 125,000 battle-hardened German soldiers, raised their hands in surrender to British and American forces. These were men who had fought across a continent, men who had seen their comrades buried in the sand, men who had believed in the propaganda that poured from Berlin. And now they were prisoners. They expected brutality. They expected revenge. They expected to be treated as they had treated others. What they got instead would shatter everything they thought they knew about their enemy. This is the true story of how German prisoners of war discovered something in America that changed them forever. The story of men who arrived expecting death and found safety instead. A story that reveals how one nation's humanity became the most powerful weapon of all. If you want to discover what really happened when the enemy came to America, stay with me until the end. Before we begin, please comment below where you are watching from. Knowing where my viewers come from helps me create better content for you. Now, let us start. The first German prisoners began arriving in the United States in mid-1943. They came in Liberty ships, those same vessels that had carried American troops and supplies to Europe. Now they returned filled with the enemy. The ships crossed the Atlantic, where at any moment a German U-boat could send a torpedo slamming into the hull. The prisoners knew that their own countrymen might kill them. That irony was not lost on anyone. When the ships docked at ports in New York and Virginia, the German soldiers stepped onto American soil for the first time. Most of them were young. Many were teenagers. Some had been fighting since Poland in 1939. Others had joined recently, full of Nazi ideology and belief in German superiority. What they all shared was fear of what would happen next. Nazi propaganda had told them horrific stories about America. They had been taught that Americans were subhuman, weak, divided, controlled by Jews and communists. They had been told that American soldiers would torture prisoners, that prisoners would be starved, that they would be worked to death in labor camps. Some believed they would be executed immediately. As they marched off the ships in chains, many thought they were marching to their deaths. The reception they received shocked them. No beatings, no torture, no executions. Instead, they were given medical examinations. They were checked for diseases. Wounds were treated. Men who had gone months without proper medical care suddenly found themselves being helped by American doctors. They were given clean clothes. They were processed efficiently, without cruelty. Then they were loaded onto trains, not cattle cars, Pullman passenger cars, the kind of comfortable railway cars that many Germans had never experienced, even as free citizens back home. The comfort amazed them. Padded seats, windows they could look out of, space to move around. As the trains rolled through the American countryside, the prisoners stared in disbelief. They saw cities untouched by war, factories producing goods at impossible rates, farms stretching to the horizon, highways filled with automobiles. They saw a nation at the height of its power, completely unmarked by the destruction they had left behind in Europe. One prisoner later recalled that moment. He said that it was then, looking out the train window, that he first understood Germany had lost the war, not because of any battle, but because America was simply too vast, too wealthy, too powerful to defeat. The trains carried them to camps across the United States, 700 camps in total. They were spread across 46 states. Some camps held thousands of prisoners, others held only a few hundred. The camps were located mostly in the South and Southwest, in places with mild climates. The government wanted to minimize construction costs. They also wanted the prisoners far from factories and cities for security reasons. But they also planned to use the prisoners for labor. America faced a severe labor shortage. Millions of American men had gone overseas to fight. Farms needed workers. Factories needed workers.
The German prisoners would fill that gap. When the prisoners arrived at the camps, they expected the worst. They expected barbed wire and guard towers. They got that, but they also got something else, something none of them had expected. They got barracks that were clean and dry. They got beds with mattresses. They got blankets. They got running water and flush toilets. They got electric lights. The camps looked like American military bases, because that is exactly what they were modeled after. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required the United States to house prisoners in conditions comparable to its own soldiers. America followed those rules strictly, not out of kindness alone, but because American soldiers were prisoners in Germany. The better America treated German prisoners, the more likely Germany would treat American prisoners well in return. That calculation saved lives on both sides. But the prisoners did not know that. All they knew was that they were being treated better than they had dared to hope. Then came dinner, the first meal in an American prison camp. When the prisoners lined up and received their food, many thought it was a mistake. They received the same rations as American soldiers: meat, vegetables, bread, coffee, portions that seemed impossibly large. One prisoner asked the guard if the food was supposed to be shared among several men for a week. The guard laughed and told him no, that was his meal for one day. The prisoners couldn't believe it. Many of them had been on reduced rations in North Africa for months. They had grown thin. They had grown weak. Now they sat in an enemy prison camp, eating better than they had eaten in years. Some prisoners refused to eat at first. They thought the food was poisoned. They thought it was a trap. But hunger won out. They ate, and they realized the food was real. That first night in the camps, something remarkable happened. The prisoners went to sleep, and for the first time in months, maybe years, they slept without fear. No bombs falling, no artillery shelling, no orders to march before dawn, no officer screaming at them. Just silence, just safety, just sleep. One prisoner later said those words that would become famous: "We could sleep without fear." That simple statement captured everything. These were men who had lived with death for years, who had seen their friends blown apart, who had wondered every day if they would survive. And now, as prisoners of war, they felt safe for the first time since the war began. The irony was not lost on anyone. They were safer as prisoners in America than they had been as soldiers fighting for Germany. Over the following days and weeks, the prisoners settled into camp routines. They woke up at 5:30 in the morning. They ate breakfast. At 7:30, they went to work. Most prisoners worked on farms. America desperately needed farm labor. The prisoners picked cotton, harvested fruit, worked in fields across the country. Others worked in canneries, in lumber camps, in factories that produced non-military goods. The Geneva Convention allowed prisoners to work, but only in jobs not directly supporting the war effort. The prisoners could not be forced to build weapons or ammunition. They could not be forced to work in dangerous conditions, and they had to be paid 80 cents per day, paid in scrip that could only be used at the camp canteen. It was not much money, but it was more than many prisoners had earned in their entire lives. They could buy cigarettes, candy, writing paper, and other small luxuries. The work was hard. Farm labor in the American South during summer was brutal, but it was not war. There were no bullets, no bombs, no death. The prisoners worked alongside American civilians, often women and elderly men and teenagers. The young men had all gone to war. What remained was a nation held together by those who stayed behind. The interactions between prisoners and American civilians varied. Some Americans hated the Germans. They had sons or husbands or brothers fighting overseas. They saw the prisoners as the enemy. But others saw them differently. They saw young men far from home doing necessary work. They saw human beings. Friendships formed. American farmers invited prisoners to meals. Women wrote letters for prisoners who didn't speak English well. Children played with prisoners during breaks. In some camps, local girls attended social dances where prisoners played music. Romance bloomed between prisoners and American women. Several marriages eventually resulted. The American government tried to prevent this fraternization, but it happened anyway. Humanity found a way. Meanwhile, camp life continued. The prisoners had time for education, recreation, and entertainment. They formed orchestras, they put on theatrical productions, they showed movies 4 nights a week, they published newspapers, they taught each other languages, mathematics, and business. University professors who were prisoners taught classes. Students earned credits that German universities would later accept. The camps had libraries, though never enough books. The YMCA printed thousands of books for the camps. The prisoners read works that had been banned in Nazi Germany. They read remarks All Quiet on the Western Front. They read Thomas Mann. They read literature that gave them a different view of their own